Okay, last part three. So we saw how the Daily Mail covered this story, about people. Let's go back to it. A staggering number of people who are fit to work but have been on benefits for 3 years. 4 out of 10 work related benefits claimed by long term unemployed. Ian Duncan Smith releases report which includes the damning figures. Ministers under fire for capping benefits at £26,000 a year per household. And finally, study found a third of all children are not living with both birth parents. And we have, of course, that I didn't mention in the last video, we have who this was written by. So we've got Tim Shipman, Deputy Political Editor, and Matt Chorley, Mail Online Political Editor. And when we have the 2 dates of it being published and then updated, so published in 24th of April 2013, updated 4th of June 2013, and of course we have all the usual sort of page furniture for social media, and we can see, of course, down at the bottom left hand corner there, no, bottom right hand, we can have a look at over 1,000 comments. If you've never read any of the comments on any Daily Mail online news stories, I would recommend that you go and have a look, because they are unmoderated, and there's a great deal of ranting that goes on, and quite a lot of interesting opinions, should we say, are often shared. Anyway, so that's how the Daily Mail reported on this. This is how the Telegraph reported on it. 1 million on benefit capable of work. 1 million people who are capable of work are stuck on benefits. Ian Duncan Smith will disclose on Wednesday. The Work and Pension Secretary will release figures showing how many people are long-term claimants of unemployment benefit and other welfare payments. The statistics are likely to add to a coalition row over the growing cost of social security payments, which economists say is hampering efforts to reduce the deficit. It could also add to tensions within Labour over how to deal with the growing benefit budget. In an annual report in his social justice strategy, Mr Duncan Smith will publish statistics showing the scale of entrenched social breakdown that has taken hold across Britain over the last decade. So remember, this was 2013, so this was 7 years ago. And at the time we had a coalition government. So the Conservative Party were not fully in control, or they weren't fully in power. They shared their power with some of the Liberal Democrat Party, and so that's why it says in that second paragraph about the statistics are likely to add to a coalition row. So the coalition government. So also 7 years ago, we were a few years into this idea of austerity, which we've been in now for a decade. And that's why and the reason we went into austerity, again in that second paragraph, economists say it's hampering efforts to reduce the deficit. So this was essentially how much the British country, the whole of the UK, was actually in debt. So the deficit is not just how much personal debt that individuals in the UK have, credit cards and student loans and so on, not just that, but also the amount of money that the British government has had to borrow from the World Bank to keep the country afloat, essentially. So there was very much a drive a decade ago, after we had the collapsing, the financial crash caused by the banks, and that worldwide crash that caused a great deal of problems and caused a worldwide recession. The UK decided to take the route of getting out of debt by cutting as much spending as possible. So essentially, if it's your own personal finances, for example, if you have a large credit card bill, you might decide, well, do you know what, I'm going to cut down. I'm not going to buy new clothes for a while. I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to get takeaways. I'm going to cut back my spending. So, and that has been extremely easy, as I'm sure you'll agree, over this last year, because we can't really go anywhere. But the knock-on effect, as we've seen very much this year, is that if the public cannot go out, cannot go and buy clothes and food and drink, entertainments, and so on, the knock-on effect is that those businesses do not get the income. And then in turn, those businesses do not need as much staff, and they don't need as many people working there, and then that means that people's jobs are lost, and we can end up, as we have done this year, partly, well, mainly because of the virus, we've ended up in a downward spiral. So the financial deficit of the country has not been reduced; it's grown, but that is the same across the globe, and caused by possibly events beyond our control. And I say possibly because the virus, how it was dealt with, we can look at other countries and see other countries have dealt with things better. Anyway, let's get back to this story. So we have a picture there of Iain Duncan Smith, and if we were analysing this story, we would be also including looking at that picture, and we would be particularly analysing his body language there, and the way that the photograph depicts his full face, and so on and so forth, which we will do later in this term. But let's focus for now on the text. So we have still the same story, but we have 1 million people on benefit capable of work. So not quite the same sort of scaremongering tactics, shall we say, that the Daily Mail showed. So 1 million people who are capable of work are stuck on benefits, whereas, if you remember, the Mail had staggering number of people, so staggering, and then damning figures, whereas here we've got stuck, capable and stuck. So not as extreme, shall we say. And the Telegraph has, until very recently, tended to take a slightly more centrist approach to an awful lot of news stories, but within the recent couple of years, for lots of other contextual reasons to do with the ownership of the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, things have changed. So that's the other thing. And those of you doing Language in the Media 2 next term will actually look at how the ownership of newspapers, who owns them, who runs them, and so on, what that does to the editorial stance that they take, where they lie politically. So the Telegraph also is what's regarded as part of the quality press, which means that they tend to use a higher register. So they tend to use far more complex sentences, more complex language, and tend to provide more context and more detail. Rather than going for sort of easy wins and sort of simplistic language that we see in the popular press, like the Mail. So we've got sort of more detail here again, underneath about, Work and Pension Secretary, and so on. So we've got long-term claimants, welfare payments. We've got growing cost. We've got hampering efforts, tensions, and entrenched social breakdown. So that last quote, Mr. Duncan Smith will publish statistics showing the scale of entrenched social breakdown that has taken across Britain over the last decade. That is what the Daily Mail's, the Mail Online, their last point there. Study found 1/3 of all children are not living with both birth parents. That's social breakdown as far as a conservative right-wing point of view is concerned. That's social breakdown, not what we might see as social change if we were taking a more centrist or left-wing view, but actually if we take a right-wing point of view, then we are going to see that as a social breakdown. Society is breaking down rather than society is changing. This is how the Express reported on the same story. The 1 million who are fit to work but live on benefits. 1 million welfare claimants have lived on working age benefits for 3 out of the last 4 years, despite being judged capable of trying to find a job. Shocking figures revealed last night. There were among 2.3 million benefit claims last year by people indicating a capacity for work or work-related activity. So we have some of that same sort of scaremongering. So we've got in capital letters, fit to work. And, we know, because we understand how language works now in contemporary media terms and contemporary digital terms, that capital letters is the equivalent of shouting. So if you can imagine somebody saying this, the 1 million who are fit to work but live on benefits, so having that shouted, that section of fit to work, gives us a tone straight away. But they live on benefits, the scroungers. That's very much the tone that's here. And then we've got in that second line down, despite being judged capable, shocking figures revealed. So, being judged. And so, of course, the implication is when we read those types of words, that type of language, these people, despite being judged capable, the implication there for us reading it is that we too should be judging these people. So they're capable of finding a job, they just don't want to. The lazy scroungers, as we saw back here. Is Britain a nation of lazy scroungers? That's the implication. Clearly they are. Shocking figures, that staggering number, it's all there. Damning figures. So extremely negative language that is implying and is trying to make us feel certain things. So that was a very well laid out rational point, but I will still hold to my emotional opinion based on no facts or evidence. So why have I put that one in there? Well, I've put that story in there because all of that quote there, is Britain a nation of lazy scroungers? Welfare Secretary says there are 1 million people capable of getting on their bike and finding work, but are not bothering to do so. Is he right? He wasn't. So as it says there, The Guardian debunked the entire story in 2017. So, this story was very much arose out of nothing. So 1 million people capable of getting on their bike and finding work. Now, the reason why it says getting on their bike is because this was a catchphrase, a slogan from the 1980s and from Margaret Thatcher's government, Conservative government, and one of her ministers. He suggested that this is what people ought to do. If there were no jobs where they lived, they ought to get on their bike and go and find work. That, of course, is no longer quite possible, aside from anything else, because bicycles are extremely expensive nowadays. But also, we're seeing, again, this similar type of rhetoric, that poor people, as I mentioned in the last video, or maybe it was the first one, but anyway, I've said during this lecture that we've had an awful lot of MPs, Conservative MPs, saying over the last week, 10 days, that people who can't afford to feed their children should sell their goods, anything that they have, they should sell it. Sell their assets was the comment that came out from one. I'm not sure whether it was a Conservative MP or just a Conservative celebrity. It was one of the two on Twitter, and they said that people should sell their assets, and of course, that this person was sort of widely derided on Twitter for actually using that phrase of selling assets, because if you're poor, you don't have any assets. And the reply from, I think it was Nicky Clark is the person that said it. His reply was that they could sell things like their mobile phones, their handbags, and their pearls. Um, I don't know. I somehow don't think that people who cannot afford to feed their children, I think it's unlikely that they have um, pearl necklaces, and other expensive jewellery just hanging around their house. I find that somewhat hard to believe. Um, and of course, as has been pointed out regularly, uh, if people who are very poor get rid of their mobile phones, they will not be able to claim for universal credit. So they will not be able to make claims for benefits because they have to be done using a mobile phone. So we have a situation where we've got MPs saying one thing that actually doesn't really work in the real world. People now need mobile phones in order to claim any benefits. And we could have said perhaps a year ago, well, you can go to your local library and go online and do it there. Libraries are no longer open because of the pandemic. So, people need mobile phones. And then, of course, you have to pay for your mobile phone bill, or if you have a computer at home, you have to pay for your internet, your Wi-Fi bill. And, we don't have free Wi-Fi. So, there are things that have now become necessity, but as I say, we have some members of parliament who don't appear to be aware of how life really is for people. So this story, 1 million people capable of getting on their bike and finding work, but are not bothering to do so, as I say, proved to not be true. And in fact, those long-term unemployed were people who had serious illnesses, who were not able to work for very real reasons. That wasn't reported in the right-wing news. But, and here's the problem with this notion of fake news, it doesn't matter how much evidence that we can lay out, people, all of us, are inclined to hold on to our emotional opinions based on no facts or evidence, which is one of the reasons why it's perhaps not such a good idea to get into those types of arguments online, on social media. And, I know I've certainly have been guilty of getting into those rows in the past. I tend not to do it now because actually it's a waste of everyone's time, because ultimately most people are not going to change their opinions based upon something somebody on the internet said. And also, there are an awful lot of quotes about how it's pointless arguing with somebody who is holding an emotional opinion. And, some unkind comments have said, don't bother arguing with a pig. Is one of the sayings is, don't bother arguing with a pig because you're both going to get covered in mud and the pig's going to enjoy it. And also there's another one about it's like playing chess with a pigeon, and what will happen is that the pigeon will kick over all of the chess pieces and shit all over the board and believe they've won. So yeah. And of course, both of those particular sayings are extremely derisory, extremely negative to the people holding those emotional opinions. And, but we all hold them at one time or another. Um, but yes, always follow the facts and the evidence. So, be a critical reader. Even if you think, I don't want to believe that, read around, find out more. Don't fall victim to confirmation bias. So this is one of the things that we see, particularly with vaccination deniers. So people who believe that that having any vaccines at all is a bad thing. So you will quite often come across people who will say this type of, like the first cell there, I've heard the rhetoric from both sides, time to do my own research on the real truth. And unfortunately, we often go to Google, and if we see a link that agrees with what you already believe, then that supports your viewpoint, then you're more likely to then think, well, clearly I'm right. We actually hear those comments from, as I say, vaccine deniers who will say, well, I've heard that, people say that you should get your kids vaccinated. And I've also heard that there are all these terrible, terrible different chemicals in vaccines. So I went and did my own research on Google, and, and I found out that, yes, these different chemicals are terrible. And therefore, I'm not going to get my children vaccinated. And it doesn't matter that there are hundreds, thousands of medical experts and scientists who are also, scientists, medical experts who have spent their lives doing research that's peer reviewed and is therefore reliable. They're all saying get vaccinations, and you, person, who of course now is commonly known as Karen. Karen has spent 10 minutes, an hour maybe, Googling, and she now can match her 10 minutes or her hour of Googling to years of scholarly research that's all peer reviewed. But I'm sure you've all seen the sort of the jokes and the memes around that. But yeah, don't fall victim to confirmation bias. Read around, find out more. It'd be too easy. Often, if a story is too good to be true or seems too good to be true, it is. And on that note, don't believe everything that I say either, or any of your lecturers for that matter. We are human beings, which means that, yes, we do have political opinions and views. The important thing is to always interrogate that, ask questions, read around, and, trust the research that is peer reviewed. So that means trust the research that appears in reasonable outlets. So, where you can go and find out if this same story is being said in a number of different reliable outlets. And, we all get taken in at one time or another with fake news, especially if it's a story that we really like. At the moment, I really, really want to think that there is a fake Melania. But, it sounds almost too good to be true. So, it's one of those things I'm taking with a pinch of salt. And, if the truth comes out in sort of 6 months' time and says, yes, there was more than one Melania, and she didn't go to an awful lot of events because she just couldn't stand the sight of her husband anymore, then that will be sort of quite amusing. But, when it comes to other things, other sort of more important stories, read around, go and look at the original evidence, and don't believe everything you read, don't believe everything you hear. Find out, but make sure that you are getting your information from reasonable sources. And on that note, I will see you online in our seminars on Tuesday and Wednesday. Stay safe, and hopefully the weather will improve so you can get out to at least get some fresh air.